getting up and getting dressed and coming on out. I'll be back tonight. We're going to look at something that's kind of unique. I mentioned too in the announcements, this thing of guilt is I owe you, and anger, you owe me, and then greed is I owe me. And tonight we're going to look at God owes me. And so be back tonight at 6 o'clock. Open your Bibles, if you would, to the book of 1 Samuel. 1 Samuel chapter 21 and 22 is where we're going to be. I want to tell you a story this morning about David. David, according to the book of Acts, was a man after God's own heart. And when you look at him from a human perspective, you're like, wait a minute. A man after God's own heart. He committed murder. He was an accessory to murder. He was an accessory to a cover-up. He was guilty of adultery, yet this is a man after God's own heart. And he's a man after God's own heart because he made right what he made wrong. And that is one of the significant trademarks of David's life. But in 1 Samuel 21, let me give you a little backstory here. Saul is a king. Saul is a nasty piece of work. He is just a clot of carnality. He was not a good guy. And as a result of one of the exploits of David, instead of giving David a check, Saul said, I'm going to give you my daughter. He had a daughter by the name of Michal. And so David and Michal get married, which now Saul is David's father-in-law. David still was in a bad situation. Well, Saul hated David because David behaved himself wisely. And you remember the song that they wrote? You know, David has slain his tens of thousands and Saul but thousands. And so he didn't like that. And on at least two occasions, Saul had a spear in his hand and threw it at David at the kitchen table. And David jumped out of the way and barely escaped getting killed. And so it has finally come to a breaking point, and David has ran away just to stay alive. He's scared to death now. And he goes to a place called Nob, N-O-B, and Nob means what it sounds like, a hill. And it was at Nob where the tabernacle was set up. Now, the Ark of the Covenant was not in the tabernacle. It was at Kirjath Jearim, a few miles away. But we've got the original old tent is set up at Nob. And Nob is also where the priest, wherever the tabernacle was, that's where the priest lived. And so it was a town where the priests lived. And the guy that was sort of the acting high priest was a gentleman by the name of Ahimelech. And in another portion of the scripture, he is also called Ahijah. But this Ahimelech was the great-grandson of Eli. And so we've got the high priest, we've got the tent set up, the tabernacle set up, and all the priestly folks are there. Chapter 21, verse 1. Then David came to Nob, to Ahimelech, the priest, and Ahimelech was afraid at the meeting of David. Now, why would David showing up by himself, why would that cause Ahimelech to be afraid? Well, the basic reason is this. Saul has never liked David, and there's always been ill feelings on the part of Saul, not David. And on one occasion, David went to a city, and the priest in that city offered David some help and refuge. Saul finds out about it. So he sends the A-team into the city and kills the priest. Okay? David shows up at Nob. You see now why Ahimelech might be just a little bit on the nervous side? Because the last time somebody helped David, they got killed. And so he's thinking the same thing. And so he says unto David, why are you alone? Nobody's with you. And David said unto Ahimelech the priest, the king hath commanded me a business. He lied. Okay? So there are a couple of things going on in David's life. Number one, He is living on fear right now. He is afraid of his father-in-law. Fear now has produced a defensive mechanism called dishonesty. All right? He is not on business. He is lying about that. And so he says now in verse number 2, well, the king hath commanded me a business, and hath said unto me, let no man know anything of the business whereof I send thee. Yeah, even the king didn't know about the business. And what I have commanded thee, and I've appointed my servants to such and such a place. The reason I'm alone, I'm supposed to meet my boys. And my boys are over, and so he tells them they're in another spot. That's why he's by himself. Now, therefore, what is under thine hand? Give me 5 loaves of bread in mine hand, or what is their present? The guy's hungry. He's not eaten for 3 days. And so he comes to the priest and he says, hey, you got any groceries? But I am really, really hungry. And so verse number 4, the priest answered and said, there is no common bread here under mine hand. There's no ordinary household food here. The only thing that's available, which lets you know this place was kind of in some dire straits, because they didn't have any groceries. He said, the only thing I have is hallowed bread. Now this hallowed bread is the showbread that was changed every Sabbath. They would bake 12 loaves of bread, one for each of the tribes, and every Sabbath the high priest would go in and he would take this old bread, this week-old bread, and he'd give it to the priest, and the priest would eat that, and then they'd put hot bread, they would replace it. That was the only bread that was available, and now, according to Leviticus 24:9, only the priests had access to this bread, and they could only eat it in the tabernacle. That was the law. David's not a priest. But you remember on an occasion, Jesus let it be known that the laws of the Sabbath could be abrogated if life was necessary. You know what I'm saying? If it was a matter of mercy and a matter of saving a life, law was not as important as mercy. And so this is going to kick in here. And he says, if the young men have kept themselves at least from women. So if you were on a military excursion, which David is claiming to be on, they could not have had relationships with women. Now, this is a ceremonial purity thing, all right? To get this bread, we're going to forget all the laws concerning eating this desacralized bread, but, I mean, at least the guys need to have not slept with the women for the last few days. And David says, well, of a truth, women have been kept from us about these 3 days since I came out, and the vessels of the young men are holy, and the bread is in a manner common. He said, we understand that this bread is normally not for guys like us, but there's a real need here. And so the priest gave him hallowed bread. For there was no bread there but the showbread that was taken from before the Lord to put hot bread in the day when it was taken away. Now, David is in Nob. He is the enemy, at least from Saul's perspective. Saul hates him. Saul wants him dead. And so David has escaped just a few miles. Nob is on the north side of Jerusalem, and so he's getting out of Dodge. Now, a certain man of the servants of Saul was there that day, detained before the Lord. Now, Doeg was an Edomite. This guy was not a Jew, but he was on the staff of Saul. He was probably like the chief of the shepherds. And so he had a pretty important position, and he was in league with Saul, and Doeg sees David there. Now, he was detained before the Lord, which we're not exactly sure what this means. It could mean that he had committed some kind of trespass and could not leave until he had paid a sacrificial price, or there was something that he had to stay in the tabernacle for. So he was detained before the Lord, and his name was Doeg, an Edomite, the chiefest of the herdmen that belonged to Saul. And David said to Ahimelech, now, not only do I need some groceries, but I need a gun. I don't have any means of self-defense at all. Well, he's given him these 5 loaves of bread, and he says, is there a sword here? They're not a sword or a spear, for I have neither brought my sword nor my weapons with me, because the king's business required haste. Yes, it did. He needed to get out of Dodge like right now. And the priest said, the sword of Goliath, the Philistine, whom thou slewest in the valley of Elah, behold, it is here, wrapped in a cloth behind the ephod. If thou wilt take that, take it. for there is no other save that here. And David said, there is none like that. Give it to me. And so he's gone and he's gotten groceries. Now he's got a gun. He's being taken care of by Ahimelech the priest. But we've got a problem. Everything was good up until this little statement that Doeg the Edomite was there, who was one of the staff of Saul. Now, you know what's about to happen, right? He's going to get on the cell phone and speed dial Saul and tell him, I know where David is. You do? Yep. I'm standing here looking at him right now. All right? Look at verse number 10. David arose and fled this day for fear of Saul. So he sees Doeg, and he knows what's going to happen. Doeg is going to run back to the house. I can't stay in Nob. Saul's going to come get me. And so he goes to Achish, who was the king of Gath. Now he's got he's got Goliath's sword, which is probably the most famous sword in Canaanite history. He's got this huge sword. He's David, who used it. The last time it was used, he used it to cut the head off of this Philistine hero. And so where does he go? He goes to Gath. Guess whose hometown Gath was? Goliath. Not exactly the safest place for him to go. But he's banking on this. Now, if I go to Gath, this is the place where Goliath was born, and he was a hometown hero. I'm coming into town having the guy's sword and having the distinct honor of being the one that killed him in battle. I'm not sure how well this is going to go, but perhaps they will think, this guy now must be an enemy of Saul. And if he's an enemy of Saul, guess who else he's an enemy of? Us. And so maybe I can use, and so David is kind of banking on that. And so look at verse number 11 now. And the servants of Achish said unto him, is not this David the king of the land? Well, actually, no. He's not the king. Saul is the king. Did they not sing one to another of him in dances, saying, Saul hath slain his thousands and David his 10,000s? Is this who we're looking at here? And David laid up these words in his heart, yeah. And was sore afraid of Achish, the king of Gath. So now, fear got him out of Jerusalem. Fear's got him out of Nob. And now he's in Achish, fearful. He's also now on a list of lies. He wasn't sent there by Saul to Ahimelech. Now, look what's going to happen in verse number 13. He changed his behavior before them and feigned himself mad in their hands and scrabbled on the doors of the gate and let his spittle fall down upon his beard. Then Achish said unto his servants, Lo, you see the man is mad. Wherefore then have you brought him to me? Folks that were mentally disturbed were considered demon-possessed in this part of the world at this time, and nobody wanted anything to do with them. And so Achish was like, what are you bringing him to my house for? Don't bring this guy in here. Get him out of here. Have I need of madmen that you've brought this fellow to play the madman in my presence? Shall this fellow come into my house? And the answer was, no. All right, now what now has David done? Well, he's running on fear. Fear has brought him to lying. Lying now has made him become somebody he's not. Okay, he's acting like he's crazy. He spit all over his beard. You know, he's dragging his foot and he's scratching on the door and carrying on like that. And the king says, "What'd you bring him to me for?" Well, there is a law in the universe, I suppose, is how broad this goes. It's called the law of attraction. And the law of attraction says what you are, you attract. You create the atmosphere around you by being who you are. And it's a truth that people are brought together if they have a mutual spirit. Don't you like to be around people that have something in common with you? I love it when the ladies in the church, I'll see them bundled up before church on Sunday night or Wednesday night normally, and they got their phones out. Look at this one. Oh, look at this. I know what they're doing. They got pictures of their grandbabies going on. That they have that in common. Now, I think that's a great thing. Somebody that is in your business, for instance. You know, if you happen to be an attorney, you hang around those guys. If you like to hunt, I love to hunt. I hang around guys that like to hunt, like to talk about stuff like that. I don't hang around scientists. You know, mathematicians, I don't have a whole lot in common with them except they like to hunt, and we can count up the deer we shoot. And I'm good with that. But fear is a very disabling emotion, and you know that as well as I do. So, according now to what we're looking at, David is about to create a climate around him because of who he has become. Now, drop down in verse number 1 of chapter 22. Word has spread about David. Now look in chapter 22. David therefore departed thence and escaped to the cave of Adullam. And when his brethren and all his father's house heard it, they went down thither to him. So this is about 10 miles southeast of Gath. And so he's made this 10-mile trip. He's now living in a cave. His family hears about it. You got some family members that show up. Verse number 2, that's not all that shows up. Everyone that was in distress, everyone that was in debt, and everyone that was disillusioned, or discontented rather, gathered themselves unto him, and he became a captain. Well, what a bunch to be the captain of, right? Here are the guys. Look at who it is. Everybody that was in distress. All right, they're depressed about something. Something's going on in their lives that they just cannot handle, and they're distressed. They're angry about it. Now, not only that, but their distress also has created some debt. They owe somebody some money. They owe somebody something, and so what do? They ran. Because I owe you. I owe you some money, and I don't have it, or I'm not going to pay it, and so I'm distressed about that, and so I'm just going to run away. Then they were also discontented. What were they discontented about? Well, their current circumstances. If you're in debt, are you discontented about that? You know, if you're distressed, and so this was a pack of punks that were, these were the guys these were some nasty boys right here. And so they hear about David, and they assume, now if David has been treated like this by Saul, guess what he probably is? Distressed and in debt and discontented. He's just like us. And so they're attracted to David because, well, actually, David is a fearful man right now. And fear, I don't know a whole lot about what I'm fixing to tell you, but I do know this much. If you have St. Augustine grass, anybody have St. Augustine grass in their yard? Yeah, used to, exactly. Good, healthy, green St. Augustine grass. And Jed, you might want to correct me if I'm wrong about this because you're the fertilizer guy. Does not that grass give off pheromones? And pheromones are chinch bug cologne. You know what I'm talking about? It's like a grill with steaks on it in the neighborhood, and the chinch bugs are going to follow the pheromones, and they're going to eat your grass all to pieces. All right, so they found something that they're attracted to, and you create the climate around you, by the way. What you are attracts what you are. David now, he is living in fear. Fear has just consumed him. This fear, this defensive mechanism to get away, has now brought him to the point where he's being a little loose with the truth. He's lying. He's not on king's business. Fear again has taken over, and he's left Gath, and he's gone down to the cave of Adullam. And now the pheromone of fear and the pheromone of being dishonest and the pheromone of being disgusted with the way things are has attracted this group of 400 men. 400 of them. Now, why were they attracted to David? Can you guess why? 400 gangsters, 400 men that were involved in drive-by spearings and all this stuff, you know what I'm talking about? This was just a nasty group. They were angry, broke, disillusioned, depressed, discontented punks. And they found their pheromone. They get drawn to David. Now, in chapter 25, I've got just a few minutes to wrap this up. In chapter 25, David sent 10 men to see a wealthy businessman about getting some supplies. Very wealthy guy. They needed food and water and so on. And so while they were there, they offered some protection for his herdmen. And so they just formed a 10-man wall around his herdmen while they did their work. And then they went back to David. And so this guy named Nabal was the one that was the wealthy businessman. And he had benefited from these men's protection. They didn't steal anything from Nabal. They brought protection. Now, they've been around David for a while. Now, David was not a punk. David was not, he was not the character of these men. David was a godly man. You know, good people can do the wrong thing. Now, this was a man that had a heart after God. And so don't think that, you know, because I'm Christian, I will never do anything wrong. Yeah, you will. That we already have. Now, does that mean that you're not a child of God? No. Just like when our children disobeyed us, does that mean they're not our kids anymore? Or does that mean they're disobedient children? We're disobedient children, and so the relationship that you have with God will never be broken, but your fellowship can be disturbed. And so there were times in David's life when his fellowship was disturbed, but his relationship was not destroyed. Now, Nabal, which by the way means fool, he's about to live up to his name. And in chapter 25, the first 11 verses, I'm not going to read all of these, but he sends some men back to get some supplies for the service of protection that they provided. And Nabal, the fool, said, I ain't giving you nothing. Well, word gets back to David. What did he say? I ain't giving you nothing. Well, David, look at verse number 13. Now this is his response for being told, no, we're not giving you any food. David said unto his men, gird ye on every man his sword. All right, lock and load, boys. We ain't putting up with this. We're going to go back to Nabal, and they're going to do all this damage. And they girded on every man his sword. And David also girded on his sword. And there went up after David about 400 men, and 200 abode by the stuff. And one of the young men told Abigail. Now, Abigail was Nabal's wife. Beautiful woman. Wise woman. She gets word that David and 400 men are coming to do some damage. Abigail runs and grabs a bunch of groceries and loads them on donkeys and leads them out down the road, and she meets David. And David is explaining, you know, we're here to kill your husband. And she says, please, you know, he's a fool, Long story short, she gives him this food and takes care of the situation. And David, and then, by the way, David will later marry this woman. Because Nabal apparently has a stroke or something and is taken out of the picture. But now, verse 15 and 16. Look in chapter 25, I think verse 15 and 16. Now, this is this 400 men, actually a total of 6. But these men were the crude, rough, discontent, in debt, disillusioned street punks. These were gang members. Now look what has happened now, verse 15 of chapter 25. But the men were very good unto us. We were not hurt, neither missed we anything as long as we were conversant with them. And when we were in the fields, they were a wall unto us both by night and day. All the while we were with them, keeping the sheep. What's happened to them? What happened to them? We go from this group of malcontents to this group of protecting, kind men. What's happened? The same thing that attracted them. One guy, David. Now, what attracted 400 malcontents to David? David's attitude. Living in fear, his dishonesty. That attracted these men because they assumed that they would be welcome there. And now, the character of these men apparently has changed. Why? As a result of being around David. And my point to you is this. One man's influence, and when I say man, I'm talking about ladies as well, mankind. One individual can impact hundreds, even thousands of people. You don't have to be a committee to make a difference. You don't have to be a group. You don't have to be in a gang. You don't have to be in a club. You don't have to hide behind somebody else's character and integrity. You all by ourselves, we can make a difference in people's lives. Proverbs chapter 30 and verse number 20 says that we become like those with whom we associate. There's an attraction. Godly people attract godly people. Ungodly people attract ungodly people. I don't know of many thieves that go to the policeman's ball. You're attracted to places where you feel safe. You're attracted to places where you feel welcome, where you feel there's a sense of camaraderie here. Every strong relationship in our lives is either a miracle or a mistake. Every strong relationship that you have. How many times have you heard, or maybe even we ourselves have said, you know, that person's been a bad influence on me. Have you ever had anybody be a bad influence on you? Pretty soon, you know, you find yourself talking like them. Using the same words they use. We went to Ireland, last year I guess it was, and you hear these people talk. They speak in this Irish, I don't know, what's that, brogue or whatever it is. And you know what I did for a few days after I got home? Yeah, speaking Irish brogue. I mean, it just took a while for it to wear off. Now, whose life is being elevated by us? You see, we have a circle of friends. Everybody does. As a matter of fact, we're told that every adult American has a circle of influence of 250 people. Some more and some less, I'm aware, but the average is 250 people. What kind of pheromone, what kind of emotional, spiritual pheromone do we give off? What do people feel comfortable saying in our presence? What do people feel comfortable doing in our presence? Knowing we're not going to do anything about it. Knowing we won't say anything about it. What kind of an atmosphere do we create? I think it's a critical question for us as Christians, that I am to live a life that is honorable before God. That will attract certain kinds of people into your life. It'll attract the right kinds of people. Now, I'm not saying that it'll always attract Christians, because the Bible says that we're the salt of the earth. All right, now, one of the many things that salt does, it creates thirst. And so this old wives' tale of you can drive a horse to water but you can't make him drink ain't true. You can feed him salt, make him thirsty enough, you won't have to make him drink, he'll look it up himself. And so if we're the salt of the earth, when we come into contact with people, we should create a genuine thirst to know God. Either to know Him in salvation or to know Him in deeper intimacy. Either way, the direction of our lives should be to draw men to Christ. Now, David apparently changed the lives of his men. These men started out to be the kind of, you wouldn't want to hang out with these men. To the point where they protected us. They watched over us. You remember the time when Saul was after David, and they were asleep in the cave, you remember? And it just so happened that Saul chose the cave that David and his men were hiding in the back of it. You remember that? And so David and his men are tiptoeing out, and they're stepping over bodies. And one of the guys, David's stepping over Saul, and one of the guys says, "It's the king. He's right there. This is your chance, but he's dead asleep. Kill him." And David wouldn't kill him, but he did take his knife. Oh, yeah. He did take his knife. And he bent down and he picked up some of his pajamas. And he cut off some of his pajamas. And then he walks outside and down the hill, and he stands out in front of the cave, and he hollers, "Hey, Saul! Saul!" And Saul wakes up, and he walks to the edge, and he looks out, and there's David, the guy he's after. And he says, "Just want you to know." And he waves his pajamas, and Saul looks down. He's got a hole in his pajamas. He said, "Just want you to know, I'm not your enemy. I could have killed you." Don't you know that had an impact on those men? Don't you know that David's attitude, don't you know that back in the recesses of those caves, they heard David's prayer bouncing off the walls and echoing? Don't you know they were influenced by this one man? Now, oddly enough, they were influenced in both directions. But David changed the lives of these guys. It was his business to impact those that he associates with. Now, we don't always have to be in church to have an influence. Most of us have jobs and work, and we're out in the community on a regular basis. And we have an opportunity to influence people. On a secular job, absolutely. Absolutely. The way we respond to people, the way we talk to people, what we talk about, what we allow to be talked about in our presence, what we allow to happen in our presence without saying, no, guys, we ought not do that, and that's not right. Because people know where they feel welcome, right? People know where there's a sense of, oh, it'll be okay. And then people know also where there's a sense of, oh, no. Don't do that here. And so here we are. We live in a world that is full of punks, moral felons, people that don't know Christ, people that are enemies to the truth of the Bible. And we go out among these wolves every day. And, there are times when it becomes tempting to put on your wolf pajamas, right? And try to act like a wolf. But that's not what God wants. He wants us to change the culture instead of the culture changing us. I heard a story one time of there's a pigeon that went to a certain park, and there were crows there every day. And he was the only pigeon, so he started feeling kind of out of place, and so he decided he was going to be a crow. And so he started walking and bobbing his head like a crow and tried to do everything like a crow. But the crows never came around him. And so one day he asked one of the crows, he said, "Look," he said, "I don't understand." He said, "I'm doing everything like you guys do, but why aren't you being my friend?" And he says, "Well, we all know you're not a crow by the way you walk." And so tomorrow and today we're going to walk somewhere. We need to walk like Christ. Walk like Christ. Let's bow our heads. Lord, thank you for your goodness. Well, I can't defend everything David did. I won't attempt to. But I can praise your name for getting a hold of his heart. After 1 year, after his murder of Bathsheba's husband, he wrote Psalm 51. What a miserable year that was until he made it right with you. And that's why he's a man after God's own heart, because he made his sin right. And what an influence he's had, even on my life. Oh my goodness. 3,000 years later, his influence is still sending out these spiritual pheromones. And my life has been changed as a result of coming into contact with David. And I pray, Lord, that everybody in this building today will have this impact on everybody that they know. Father, I pray that we would be in line with your will and your word. If there's somebody here that's lost, may today be the day they accept Christ. There are people here that need to follow the Lord in baptism. And I pray, Lord, that they would just simply make the decision to do that. Folks that need to make decisions concerning your will for their lives, this is that opportunity. In Jesus' name, I'm asking all these things. Amen. As we stand and Lorraine plays, you need to come this morning for anything, would you come right now? Thank you for being here. Was it hot in here? Is everybody okay? Okay. All right. Just me then? All right. Thank you for being here. Be back tonight now. We're going to wrap up this series on resident beast of the human heart. And hope to see you then. So go home and get you a nap and get you some lunch and then be back at 6 o'clock. You do that? All right. Jed, would you dismiss us in prayer, please, sir?